Every era of performance engineering has that moment when passion, precision, and pure focus come together to create something that feels almost untouchable. A machine so dialed in that it defines what a generation expects from speed and control. In the early 2000s, the superbike scene hit a fever pitch. Every manufacturer pushed limits, every upgrade mattered, and every ounce shaved off the scale was a declaration of dominance. It was a time when riders demanded more than just horsepower numbers. They wanted balance, confidence, and connection between man and machine. This story is about one of those rare machines that managed to walk the line perfectly, a machine that took an already iconic name and elevated it into legend. Today, we dive into the Honda CBR954RR, the 2002 Fireblade that perfected the formula. Like and subscribe if you love deep dives into the machines that changed the game, and drop a comment telling us which icon you want to see next. When the Honda CBR954RR arrived in 2002, it did not simply replace a motorcycle, it refined an entire philosophy. To understand what made this Fireblade so pivotal, we need to look back at how Honda approached the superbike scene at the turn of the millennium. The late 1990s had seen an arms race in displacement and power. Rival brands focused on big numbers, on pushing horsepower higher and higher. But Honda had a different vision. The Fireblade had always stood for precision, not brute force. When the CBR954RR project began, that balance was in danger. The outgoing CBR929RR was fast and capable, but the competition was closing in. Something dramatic had to happen to maintain Honda's image as the master of usable performance. At its core, the 954RR project was about weight, or rather, the absence of it. Honda's engineers obsessed over every gram. From the moment the first prototype sketches were drafted, they treated mass like an enemy to be conquered. The result was a machine that tipped the scales around 370 pounds dry, lighter than anything in its class at the time. But it was not only lighter, it was also more compact, tighter in geometry, and more aggressive in character. The bore increased to 75 millimeters, displacing 954 cubic centimeters, and the motor itself was rebalanced to rev quicker and smoother than before. Riders who swung a leg over the 954RR noticed it instantly. It felt alive, immediate, always ready to respond to the smallest input. The frame of the Honda CBR954RR told a story of meticulous refinement. Rather than starting from scratch, Honda took the twin-spar aluminum design of the 929RR and subjected it to surgical optimization. Wall thicknesses were reduced where stress was minimal, rigidity increased where feedback mattered most. The swing arm, lighter yet stiffer, gave the rear tire a sense of planted assurance, while the revised steering geometry created sharper turn-in without sacrificing stability at high speed. Every adjustment came from testing data, not theory. It was a lesson in restraint and precision. The suspension setup reinforced that same philosophy. Shoei units front and rear were fully adjustable, but tuned from the factory to give real-world feedback rather than track-only stiffness. The idea was that a rider could commute comfortably, carve canyons with surgical confidence, and still take it to a track day without swapping components. That blend of versatility and performance became a defining Fireblade trait, and in the 954RR, it reached its purest expression. Power delivery was another area of obsession. Honda's engineers spent months refining throttle response to eliminate lag between wrist movement and wheel reaction. The fuel injection system used a dual-stage approach. Small primary injectors ensured smooth low-end response, while secondary injectors engaged under load for full throttle power. The result was linear, controllable acceleration that built trust instead of fear. It was fast, incredibly fast, yet somehow polite in its manners until you demanded more. The Honda CBR954RR was not only about feel, it was about numbers too. Around 154 horsepower at the crank, delivered through a close-ratio gearbox that allowed the engine to stay in its sweet spot. The clutch and gearbox were tuned to encourage quick shifts without upsetting chassis balance. Every interaction between rider and machine was designed to maintain rhythm. It was mechanical choreography, precise and rewarding. And yet, this focus on balance created something unusual in the market. Where rivals pursued intimidating power figures and bragging rights, Honda had produced something more human. The CBR954RR rewarded skill, finesse, and courage in equal measure. It was a superbike that asked you to participate, not just hang on. On tight back roads, its responsiveness bordered on supernatural. Riders described it as telepathic, as though it anticipated intention before input. That was not marketing, it was the culmination of years of ergonomic and dynamic testing. Honda's attention extended to the smallest details. Even the subframe was a study in lightweight engineering, built from aluminum instead of steel. The result not only saved weight but also lowered the bike's center of gravity. The brakes, large 330mm front discs paired with 4-piston calipers, provided immense stopping power with tactile feedback. Honda engineers tested dozens of pad compounds before choosing one that balanced bite with modulation. It was this relentless refinement that made the 954RR feel complete right out of the box. The visual design carried the same message. The bodywork of the Honda CBR954RR was tighter, more athletic, and free from unnecessary mass. Air intakes were enlarged, lines were cleaner, and the stance felt compact without appearing cramped. Every vent and curve served a function, directing air where it mattered most. Even the color schemes reinforced its identity: bold, aggressive, and unmistakably Fireblade. The 954RR looked fast standing still, but more importantly, it looked balanced. Despite its performance, the CBR954RR was not a race replica in temperament. It was approachable. Riders could ride it daily, cover long distances, and still unleash its fury when the road opened up. That accessibility became its secret weapon. It blurred the line between race bike and road companion better than anything else of its time. Honda's internal reports called it a total control machine, and that phrase captured its essence perfectly. But total control came with its own challenges. For riders expecting a forgiving machine, the 954RR's immediacy could feel intimidating. The light front end and sharp steering required precision. Sloppy inputs could unsettle the chassis. It was a bike that rewarded confidence and punished hesitation, not through danger, but through precision. It demanded respect, and when given that respect, it gave back pure exhilaration. At the heart of its development was the man who carried the Fireblade vision from the beginning, Tadao Baba. His mission had always been to create a superbike that blended power with real-world usability. With the CBR954RR, he and his team reached the summit of that idea. It was the culmination of everything Honda had learned since the original 1992 Fireblade, distilled into one final analog masterpiece before the digital age would take over. As the 954RR hit showrooms, the reaction was electric. Reviewers praised its handling, its throttle precision, and its astonishing agility. Some called it the most complete Fireblade ever built. It won track comparisons not because it had the most power, but because it could put every bit of its ability to the ground with surgical confidence. Riders trusted it, and that trust became its legacy. Yet even in success, the 954RR hinted at transition. The world was changing, regulations tightened, electronics began creeping into sport bikes, and manufacturers started to chase new kinds of performance. But in 2002, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the Honda CBR954RR represented the pinnacle of mechanical purity, a moment when engineering and emotion met without interference. The Fireblade name had always symbolized balance, but in the 954RR, that balance was absolute. It was as close as Honda ever came to mechanical perfection before the era of traction control, ride modes, and computer-managed stability. In many ways, it was the last superbike that truly depended on the rider. In the Honda CBR954RR, the philosophy of total control was not just a slogan, it was a manifesto. This second segment explores the mechanics behind that control, the engineering logic that transformed a high-performance motorcycle into something that felt intuitive, even to riders stepping up from smaller displacement machines. The 954RR was more than the sum of its parts, but those parts revealed just how deep Honda went to deliver its magic. At the heart of the 2002 Honda CBR954RR was an engine that embodied the Fireblade ideal. Honda's engineers increased the bore from the 929RR 74mm to 75, keeping the same 54mm stroke. This change might seem minor, but it gave the inline-four a more eager revving nature, shaving rotational inertia and increasing breathing efficiency at high RPM. The combustion chambers were reshaped for better mixture flow, and new lightweight forged pistons reduced reciprocating mass. Even the connecting rods were rebalanced to allow the motor to spin faster with less vibration. These internal refinements added up to a machine that made power not just quickly, but beautifully. The 954RR's power band surged smoothly from idle to redline, building thrust with no sudden jumps. Fuel injection became the hidden hero of this transformation. The PGM-FI system on the Honda CBR954RR was one of the most advanced of its time, using precise mapping to tailor fuel delivery to every throttle position and RPM range. Dual-stage injectors gave the bike its signature smoothness. At low speeds, the primaries kept response predictable, while at higher RPM, the secondaries opened to unleash full potential. The transition between them was so seamless that riders barely noticed. What they did notice was how connected the throttle felt. Twist it slightly, and the bike responded instantly. Twist it hard, and it surged forward without hesitation. Cooling and durability also received attention. The radiator was reshaped for more efficient airflow, using curved cores to maximize surface area without adding bulk. Honda engineers carefully calculated how air moved through the fairing to avoid hotspots and maintain consistent temperatures even during prolonged high-load runs. This stability under pressure gave the CBR954RR a reputation for reliability, something that remained part of its DNA long after other superbikes developed reputations for fragility. Beyond the engine, the chassis became a living example of Honda's craftsmanship. The frame of the Honda CBR954RR used an advanced aluminum twin-spar design, with cast and extruded sections bonded together for ideal stiffness. Honda engineers used computer simulations to find the exact balance between rigidity and flex. Too stiff, and the bike would feel nervous; too soft, and feedback would blur. The result was a frame that communicated everything without punishing mistakes. It flexed just enough under load to tell the rider what the tires were doing, giving confidence mid-corner. Geometry changes played a huge role in making the CBR954RR what it was. The wheelbase shortened slightly compared to the 929RR, and the rake and trail numbers were tightened for sharper turn-in. That combination made the bike more eager to change direction, yet its weight distribution prevented instability at high speed. Riders could flick it from side to side effortlessly, an experience that felt liberating on twisty mountain roads. The lighter crankshaft complemented this agility by reducing gyroscopic resistance, so the bike seemed to pivot around the rider's hips. Braking performance matched the rest of the package. The Honda CBR954RR's large front discs and Nissan 4-piston calipers provided immense stopping power with fine control. Honda fine-tuned the master-cylinder ratio to achieve just the right initial bite without abruptness. It allowed riders to trail brake deep into corners with confidence, knowing exactly how much grip remained. The rear brake, often overlooked, contributed subtly to stability during downshifts, keeping the chassis composed. This harmony between engine braking, rear brake pressure, and chassis balance was one of the most defining characteristics of the Fireblade's behavior. Honda also obsessed over ergonomics. The riding position of the 954RR was aggressive but not punishing. Clip-on sat low enough for aerodynamic advantage yet high enough for comfort during daily use. The seat was narrower at the front for better leg placement, while the tank shape allowed riders to grip firmly under braking. Every contact point between human and machine was sculpted to promote confidence. When you rode the 954RR, it felt like you were part of it, not perched on top. But the brilliance of the 2002 Honda CBR954RR went beyond measurable performance. What set it apart was feel, and that came from intangible details. The throttle cable tension, the clutch pull, the feedback through the foot pegs, even the sound of the intake roar as revs climbed, all were tuned deliberately to evoke emotion. Honda's development riders tested prototypes for thousands of miles to capture that elusive harmony. They called it rider unity, a state where man and machine moved as one. It was not just marketing language, it was an engineering goal. One of the reasons the CBR954RR feels so immediate is its remarkable mass centralization. Honda's engineers lowered the position of the crankshaft and moved the fuel tank slightly downward into the frame to concentrate weight near the bike's center of gravity. This made transition smoother and stability more predictable. The exhaust layout also contributed to this goal. The headers were compact, and the muffler design kept weight closer to the midpoint, minimizing pendulum effect. It might sound trivial, but those small choices were what made the Fireblade feel effortless at pace. The suspension setup completed the symphony. Honda collaborated closely with Showa to create a fork and shock that balanced street comfort with race-level control. The fork's damping characteristics were revised to handle aggressive braking loads without dive, while the rear shock offered better feedback during acceleration. Combined with the chassis geometry, it made the 954RR a bike that always told you what it was doing, even when riding near its limits. One fascinating detail lies in the Fireblade's tire development. Honda worked directly with tire manufacturers to ensure that rubber compounds matched the chassis dynamic profile. The recommended tire sizes were not arbitrary, they were chosen to complement the frame flex and suspension motion. This partnership between chassis and tire engineers gave the 954RR its legendary edge grip and stability under load. Every decision in the Honda CBR954RR's design carried the same intention: reduce effort, increase precision. Honda was not chasing the wildest horsepower numbers, they were chasing a feeling. A feeling of connection that made a rider believe the machine was reading their mind. That might sound poetic, but it was deeply technical. It required harmony among power delivery, steering response, and suspension feedback. However, this obsessive precision came at a philosophical crossroads. Some riders found the CBR954RR almost too pure. It offered no electronic safety nets, no traction assistance, no compromise. It was analog riding distilled to its essence, which meant that mistakes belonged entirely to the rider. Honda knew this, and that awareness made the achievement even more impressive. They built a machine that respected rider skill more than market trends. The Honda CBR954RR became a turning point not only for the Fireblade series but for the entire superbike world. This third segment looks at how its perfection influenced the years that followed, and why its balance of agility and control remains a benchmark for engineers today. The CBR954RR was not just a motorcycle, it was a statement about how far precision and rider focus could go before technology began to change everything. When the Honda CBR954RR hit the market in 2002, it was received as the closest thing to a street-legal race machine that still made sense for everyday riders. It showed that a superbike could be both ferocious and friendly, that power could be harnessed through balance rather than excess. For Honda, this was the final expression of the Fireblade's original vision, a machine defined by total control, not total output. But as the industry evolved, the definition of control itself began to shift. Within a few short years, rival manufacturers began introducing electronic aids, traction control, ride-by-wire throttles, and eventually, full digital stability systems. These innovations reshaped the superbike category, but they also marked the end of something special. The Honda CBR954RR stood as the last truly analog Fireblade, a machine that trusted the rider's senses more than sensors. It did not correct your mistakes, it taught you not to make them. For that reason, it became a rite of passage for serious riders, a machine that demanded precision and rewarded mastery. The influence of the 954RR extended deep into design philosophy. Honda engineers carried forward lessons from its geometry and weight optimization into later generations, even as electronics became part of the equation. The idea that agility mattered more than raw power stayed alive long after the Fireblade name grew more complex. Modern superbikes still borrow from the 954RR's balanced principles, centralized mass, linear throttle response, and ergonomics designed for intuitive movement. Even with today's sensors and processors, engineers still talk about rider feel as an essential metric, a concept the 954RR defined 2 decades ago. For many enthusiasts, the 954RR also symbolized the end of the golden age of mechanical purity. It was the last moment when performance depended entirely on physical craftsmanship and rider skill. Every component, from throttle cable to brake lever, was a direct line of communication. There was no software smoothing your inputs or saving you from excess. This demanded responsibility, but it also offered authenticity. Riders knew exactly where their limits, and the bike's limits, were. That transparency became part of the Fireblade's enduring identity. The Honda CBR954RR's impact can also be felt culturally. It became a collector's favorite not because of rarity, but because of feel. Riders who owned one often refused to sell it, describing it as irreplaceable. The connection it offered could not be replicated by newer machines with more features. It was the difference between playing a real instrument and using digital sound. One required skill, the other simulation. That sense of direct artistry made the 954RR timeless. Track riders found that the 954RR's precision gave them confidence to push harder. The chassis feedback was so vivid that they could sense tire grip through subtle cues, the frame flex, the pitch under braking, the whisper of traction returning as they eased open the throttle. It made them faster not by overpowering them, but by teaching them to trust their own coordination. In professional settings, instructors even used the 954RR to train riders on reading mechanical feedback before moving to electronically assisted bikes. That legacy speaks volumes about its character. Even as the Fireblade evolved in later years, the 954RR remained a reference point. Engineers often described it internally as the model that captured the brand's spirit perfectly. It was the high watermark before changing emissions rules and safety standards forced heavier, more complex machines. Yet, while later Fireblades became more powerful and sophisticated, none carried the same purity of intent. The 954RR represented a balance that the industry would spend decades trying to rediscover. Honda's approach with the CBR954RR also left a mark on how performance motorcycles were marketed. It proved that finesse could sell as powerfully as horsepower. Advertisements highlighted agility, control, and connection rather than sheer numbers. That messaging changed how riders viewed superbikes. They began to value the complete experience, not just statistics. In that sense, the 954RR reshaped expectations for what a superbike should be. Decades later, enthusiasts still talk about how alive the 954RR feels, even by modern standards. It is not the fastest, nor the most technologically advanced, but it remains one of the most rewarding. Modern riders often describe it as a reminder of what riding used to mean before algorithms filtered the experience. The Fireblade's essence, the belief that a motorcycle should amplify human skill, not replace it, lives strongest in the 954RR. The 954RR's legacy also shaped Honda's later engineering culture. It reminded designers that emotion and trust mattered as much as precision. Future generations of Fireblades may have introduced electronic aids, variable valve timing, and advanced aerodynamics, but each one still carried a piece of that 2002 DNA. The CBR954RR taught Honda that perfection was not about control through computers, but connection through feel. Beyond the technical world, the CBR954RR inspired a kind of nostalgia among riders who experienced it firsthand. It represented freedom in its purest form, a time when riding was raw, personal, and unfiltered. Even those who never owned one often recognize its silhouette instantly: the compact stance, the sharp fairing lines, the purposeful posture. It became a visual shorthand for everything that made early 2000s sport bikes so captivating. Today, collectors search for clean examples of the Honda CBR954RR, preserving them as symbols of an era that will never return. Many have been restored, cared for meticulously, and displayed as living art. Others are still ridden hard, their owners refusing to let them sit idle because that would betray what the bike was built for. The 954RR was meant to move, to breathe, to be experienced, not stored behind glass. Its influence extends even to new riders who discover it years later. In a world filled with digital dashboards and adaptive systems, climbing onto a 954RR feels almost foreign: light clutch, sharp throttle, mechanical honesty. It demands respect immediately, yet rewards confidence with joy that modern electronics sometimes dilute. That emotional contrast explains why the 954RR continues to inspire even those who never rode during its original era. The ultimate legacy of the Honda CBR954RR is philosophical. It proved that mastery lies in simplicity, that removing unnecessary complexity can reveal deeper connection. It embodied Honda's belief that technology should serve the rider, not overshadow them. In doing so, it became more than a superbike. It became a lesson in restraint, craftsmanship, and trust. As we reach the end of this story, it becomes clear that the 2002 Honda CBR954RR was not just another step in evolution. It was the closing chapter of a philosophy that began with the very first Fireblade. Looking back at the Honda CBR954RR, it is impossible not to admire what it represents. This motorcycle was more than a product of its time. It was the peak of an idea that shaped an entire generation of riders. In the summary of this story, we close the loop on how one machine defined the end of an era and continues to echo through the modern world of performance engineering. The 2002 Honda CBR954RR stands as a masterpiece of mechanical honesty. It was born at the height of competition, when every brand fought to build the ultimate superbike, yet Honda chose refinement over excess. The result was a motorcycle that embodied everything the Fireblade name stood for: precision, agility, and trust. It delivered raw performance without the safety net of electronics, depending entirely on the rider's awareness and skill. That purity gave it a unique identity, one that no amount of computer assistance could ever replicate. In hindsight, the CBR954RR's importance grows even larger. It was the last of the analog Fireblades, the final expression of a hands-on philosophy before sensors began to share control. It represented a moment in engineering when human intuition guided every decision, from frame geometry to throttle mapping. The lessons learned from its balance and responsiveness continue to influence modern superbikes, even those equipped with the latest technology. Whenever designers talk about creating a natural feel or intuitive response, they are chasing what the 954RR already achieved decades ago. For riders, the Honda CBR954RR became a benchmark not because it was the most powerful, but because it felt alive. It connected thought to motion so seamlessly that it seemed to disappear beneath you. It invited you to participate, to learn, and to grow with it. That sense of partnership between human and machine is what keeps the 954RR relevant long after its production ended. Modern superbikes may offer more performance on paper, but few can match the emotional clarity this machine delivered. Its legacy is one of restraint and precision, a reminder that engineering perfection is not always about adding features, but about knowing what to leave out. The 954RR taught the world that the best machines are those that enhance the rider rather than dominate them. In that way, it did more than perfect the Fireblade formula. It preserved a way of thinking that still defines how great motorcycles are judged. So, as we close this deep dive, the takeaway is simple. The Honda CBR954RR remains one of the most balanced and beloved superbikes ever built. It marked the end of the purely mechanical era and the beginning of the digital one, serving as a bridge between generations. For many riders, it still represents the moment when speed, skill, and soul align perfectly. Thank you for spending this time exploring the story behind the 2002 Honda CBR954RR. If you enjoyed this look into a true engineering milestone, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more stories about machines that define their eras, and comment below with the next legend you want to see covered.